Good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Qureshi here, coming live from Towson, Maryland, from Umid Center for Healing Relationships. I am here with my wonderful co host, Deanna Pelly, who I have not been able to connect with for what, 2, 3 months now?
It feels like it's been since September, I think.
Well, September was last month, right? No, it wasn't. It was the month before because we're in November.
Yeah, that's right. We are in November. Yes, we are.
We are in November. Time passes by so quickly. You're absolutely right. I think we did our last I Choose Us probably in July or August, one of those days.
I
And
think it
then
was
I was away
August.
for,
Yeah.
yeah. And then I was away on vacation for about 6 weeks. And then I came back and got bombarded with a lot of things. So you know how it goes, guys. Life is tough. Okay. And we are here to try to make it just a little bit easier for you as mental health trained professionals who are trying to heal this world one person, one family, one community at a time. So, as you know, our I Choose Us series started last year with my co host, Mr. Damien, which was I Choose Me. Now we have this year's series, and Deanna and I are covering so many amazing topics.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, we can continue this and bring the information that is helpful for you. So, with that, Deanna, before we go anywhere, tell us a little bit about you because I think we need a reintroduction.
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Deanna, and I'm coming live from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Minnesota's been my home for 15 years now. I was thinking about that recently. I recently had my 15-year anniversary in Minnesota, and this is where my private practice is. I am a therapist in private practice, and tonight's topic is grief and loss, which I'm really excited about because it's actually an area of clinical interest of mine, is working in grief and loss. But I do a lot of trauma work, a lot of long-term depth work, and I love it. I love being a therapist. It's such fun and gratifying work.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And everybody can't do it, right? Like
Right.
it takes a lot out of you. There's something about this profession, this passion, I want to call it. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
For some, it is a profession. I know for me and you, it's our passion, right?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
It's very rewarding, yet there's a lot of complex ways in how we have to show up as humans who are therapists and healers.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas other professions like accounting, right, or sales, customer service, right, you can table everything at home and be like, I'm not gonna deal with this. I'm just dealing with numbers today. I don't need my emotions for numbers. But for therapists, our emotions are our biggest way of communicating.
Mm-hmm.
And we're connecting with people every day, every session, every minute, every hour. And of course, Deanna, you're the human emotion expert, right? I'm the relational trauma expert.
Mm-hmm.
And they go hand in hand, right? We both are
Yes.
doing the same work in so many similar ways, but different ways as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, in that, today's topic is very, very close and dear to my heart. When I was thinking about the title, I wanted to speak out to everyone. The title of today's episode is Beyond the Pain, from Grief to Growth. And there's another tagline that I didn't put in there, which would have been the transformative process. That's the subtitle. And for most of you that do know me, the reason why this topic is so dear and close to my heart is because I've had significant losses in my life, particularly around losing my parents. So I lost my dad right before COVID, February 2020. And then I lost my mom from COVID in 2021 in Pakistan. So imagine for me losing my parents within 13 months of each other. And then on top of that, I had to fly out to a different part of the world to bury my mother in her homeland, which is something my father actually wanted, but he ended up being here. And as my own grief journey is still happening, I'm still processing, I'm still growing, it helped me realize that I needed to make certain changes in my life to either embrace this constructively or let my life fall apart, which is what usually happens. Because grief, loss, and trauma is so powerful and significant in our lives, it turns our lives upside down, even in the most healthiest, quote unquote, healthy individuals, too, right? So that's one piece of it. The second piece is, guys, it's the holiday season. At least in the United States of America. I can't speak to other countries. It is the holiday season. There is holiday blues. There is a such thing as seasonal affective disorder, right? We do start feeling gloomy. We do want to stay in bed all day. We're not getting that vitamin D from sunlight, okay? It's actually a real phenomenon. Like the weather can impact our mood and our energy. So we're here, me and Deanna are here today to support you in all the ways that we can to get through this holiday season, because I rest and assure you, I will be doing the same thing, trying to get through. Okay. So Deanna, I think I've spoken a lot. You go ahead and chime in.
I'm so excited to be here and have this conversation. It's such an important one. And I think in our in our society, we don't talk enough about grief. I think it's something that we all sometimes have this tendency to want to avoid because it can feel really scary. As I shared, it's an interest of mine in clinical practice. When I was 3.5, my brother died of cancer, and I was raised by two grieving parents. My parents are still grieving parents. My brother died in 1989. It's been many years. I also experienced a loss that was quite significant in that. And so I love thinking about grief and loss and the impact that it has on our lives. And I like hearing stories from people of who they've lost, because I think in sharing that, we keep someone alive in a really profound and meaningful way. And so that's part of what I enjoy about that. But another facet of grief work that I actually love to talk about is grief isn't always related to death and dying. Sometimes we have a move, change of, graduating college can feel like there's grief and loss with that, even though we're moving on to something exciting. I'm one for tradition. I love my family traditions. They are so important to me. And the times when those haven't happened, or when those have changed, there's been an experience of grief with that as well. And so it's such a multifaceted topic, and I'm glad that we're gonna talk about it today.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your story. And I think these are the ways that we connected. I remember when I first met you at the virtual wellness conference, and I remember hearing you talk about the significance of relationships. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, I want to talk to that person, because we're right here. And here we are months later, for an entire year now, we've been doing this podcast. And then on top of that, like when you talk about your grief story with your brother, I talk about my grief story as an adult in her mid-30s losing her parents. Mm-hmm. It's very different time frames.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right? You were a kid. Mm-hmm. I'm a full-grown adult with a whole life going on in another state. Yet, there are going to be so many similarities in our experiences, regardless of our age, regardless of where we are developmentally. We're going to have so many common narratives and lived experiences from that grief. which is what makes us powerful healers.
Yeah.
When we can tap into that because we understand. So in that, I love the fact that you already started talking about the difference between, highlighting the differences between grief, loss, and trauma. So what I want to do is actually, I want to break those things down, those three terms. Why? Because they have been used interchangeably. We use them all the time, right? So let's talk about it. Which one do we want to tackle first? You want to do trauma, grief, or loss? Maybe we can talk about trauma. I think it makes sense to start with trauma, right? So trauma is what in its simplest forms? Deanna?
Oh, trauma in its simplest forms. Oh my gosh, I'm a therapist. I love.
There's no such thing as simple trauma.
I know there's like no such thing as like simple trauma, and like to talk about it simply. I feel like you just asked me to climb Mount Everest. Do you have a succinct way of saying trauma? I guess. I mean, are we talking?
You're absolutely right. And I think when I use the word simple, I was really referring to the easiest way to explain to someone what trauma is. And trauma is very complex, right? Very complex. What we know about trauma now versus what we knew 10 years ago, it's so much more. There's so many treatment modalities to deal with trauma, right? So yes, it's not simple at all.
Thinking about it simply, like when I think about trauma, it's simply like one of the things that it does at its core is disrupts safety. There's a safety disruption in trauma, whether it's your physical safety, your emotional safety, psychological safety, et cetera. There's some sort of disruption of safety that I think is core at when we think about trauma.
Absolutely. I agree with you. And what I would add to that is trauma can be any significant incident in your life that happens that targets or impacts those safe areas, right?
Yeah.
And I want to highlight that. Why? Because people are using the word trauma nonchalantly. Pop psychology does a great job at coming up with things that everybody think is trauma, right? So I want to make sure everybody knows when we talk about trauma here today, we are talking about significant events that have happened to you or in front of you that cause distress in different dimensions of your wellness, emotional, psychological, physical, mental, right? All of that. You have to be experiencing those when you get triggered by a trauma. There's this one quote, like on social media, I see it a lot when they distinguish the difference between trauma and an uncomfortable situation. A lot of people nowadays are saying, I'm not talking to them because they traumatize me. We want to make sure that's not what it is. If it's uncomfortable for you to go have a conversation with someone because you've had a discord in your relationship, that does not mean that's a trauma. It just means there's uncomfortability around it.
Yeah.
You will know when something has traumatized you. Right? So trauma in itself is a situation, an incident, an event that can lead to certain symptoms, psychologically, emotionally, mentally, physically, the whole 9 yards, right? And then how does grief and loss tie into this? You want to take that?
Well, I think an important thing, like thinking about grief and thinking about loss, is like we can have loss without grief. And so I just think that's like an important piece of this. Like not all loss necessarily relates to grief. I don't know, like you can like lose an earring and be like bummed but not feel grief about it, or maybe you lose an earring and you feel a lot of grief because it was a pair of earrings that were your grandmother's and it was important to you to have those. I mean, so I just think that that's an important distinction thinking about grief, because again, grief and loss go together, but grief is experienced in relation to loss of some kind. But again, you can have loss without grief. They don't have to go together. but I think that for a lot of folks, like when I think about trauma and the nuance of trauma that I see in clinical practice, especially, a lot of times there's grief interwoven with trauma in some way, shape, or form. It can be grief at the loss of the sense of safety, at how any number of things, but grief and goes really actually, I think of it like a braid is braided into trauma very intricately.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think you did a really great job at explaining that loss doesn't necessarily have grief attached to it, but grief has loss attached to it.
Yeah.
Right? Grief in itself is about loss. So how do you determine the difference, right? How do you know if it's grief or loss or both, right? Well, if you're grieving, there's a loss. And if there's a loss and you're not grieving, then it's just a loss.
Yeah.
Right. So, in again, not simple, but simplest terms, loss is, I guess I'll say, losing something or something that's been taken away from you, something that you have lost that's tangible, right? But then loss can also be intangible, which we'll talk about a little bit later, right? So loss is a deficit of something, whether it's the loss of wages, whether you lost your earring, right? Whatever it is, it's a deficit. Something has been taken away from you. And then grief is the process of how you are dealing with that loss because it's that significant. Trauma happens, incident. Loss happens, incident. Grief is the process of how you deal with trauma and loss. Was that simple enough?
I think that's great. Yeah, I think that's very.
Did you add anything to that?
No, I think you hit all the important points on that. It's very succinct. I like it.
Okay, awesome. So it's important to recognize that we all are going to experience traumas in our life, right? There's nobody in this world that can say, I've never experienced a trauma.
That is so true.
Right? Trauma happens to everybody. It's something that's innate, even though our loved ones try to shelter us from it. Right? Yet, even something as something like moving, right, from one place to another state, that could be traumatic for someone, right? Especially if they go into a school where they're experiencing bullying now. They're going to attach the move to those traumas. If I wasn't there, if I wasn't here, this wouldn't be happening to me, right? So trauma happens to everyone. And with trauma, there's loss, some form of loss, majority of the time. I don't know if you can think of an example where there's trauma and there's no loss.
No, but I can think of a lot of examples where there's trauma and there's loss.
Right. I think it's safe to say majority of the traumas have some loss attached to it.
Yeah.
Right? And then grief is the process of how I would say it's a journey process of how you heal. Yet there's no right or wrong way to grieve.
And it looks different for everyone.
Absolutely. It looks very different for everyone.
Yes.
Right? So when we do talk about traumas, what are some examples of traumas?
Oh man, we can take our natural disaster traumas. Those happen to folks. I grew up in an area. I did not actually grow up in Tornado Alley, but I grew up where there were lots of tornado sirens, and that's a trauma for folks. Like tornadoes, natural disasters, that sort of thing. That's a huge trauma for folks that they experience. A lot of the studies, I think, on post-traumatic stress disorder have been done on combat veterans and veterans in that nature. And so there's trauma associated with that. There's physical trauma, emotional trauma, attachment trauma. I could go on and on.
Yeah. And speaking of veterans, happy Veterans Day.
Yes, happy Veterans Day. Yeah.
That was a note that I wanted to say
Mhm.
before we even started, but I'm glad you brought it up. So happy
Mhm.
Veterans Day.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, trauma, so many different layers, right?
Mhm.
Domestic violence,
Mhm.
abuse, any form of abuse, poverty,
Mhm.
homelessness is trauma. Um,
Absolutely.
if you have a loved one who is dealing with addiction or severe mental health issues,
Mhm.
that can be very traumatic, especially if they're engaging in destructive behaviors,
Mhm.
right? Like your dad comes home or your mom and dad get into a fight, right? Or your siblings get into an argument and one person
Mhm.
is throwing things around, the other one's yelling and screaming, right? Those
Mhm.
are all can fall under traumatic events.
Mhm.
In that, what happens? People experience loss, right? So even when you think about a loved one dealing with addiction or mental health, and say that it's a caregiver, think about the losses that come with that, which we don't often aren't talking about, right?
Mhm.
Right? When we think about loss, we usually think about death, which is a tangible loss. And then there's intangible losses like neglect, not getting love and affection from our caregiver, intimacy, loss of friendships, right? There's a tangible piece to not having losing a friendship, but that connection, that compassion, right?
Mhm.
Those are intangible things that come with relationships.
Mhm. Yeah. Absolutely. Those are all, I think, really significant losses that folks can experience and do experience.
Mhm.
Everyone experiences loss to some degree in their life transitions, and even loss of like physical capability for folks who have an injury or an illness. That can be a really hard loss to cope with, or for seniors who need to move into assisted living, losing independence can be really painful and a really difficult thing to navigate.
Yeah. I mean, the list can go on and on about
Yeah.
how we experienced a lot of different losses. You know,
Mhm.
I myself had, as an immigrant, as a
Mhm.
Pakistani Muslim, when I moved to the US, we didn't recognize this at that time. I didn't have the language for it, but I do remember missing my family back home. The first few years were very hard.
Yeah.
Yet, nobody was asking me in my school if I was okay and how was it? How are you
Mhm.
doing? All I remember is putting me in an ESOL class because I couldn't communicate in English. Think about the significance of loss there.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, I'm getting bullied because I can't express myself. Of course we would want to run away. We want to go back to our safe place, but I couldn't.
Mhm.
And then when you come home, your parents are giving you the opposite message, like even with my identity. Like think about the losses we deal with within our identities when we have acculturation, assimilation,
Mhm.
things that are not accepted in other parts of the world. What
Mhm.
that feels like for you as a person, as a human, right?
I think it speaks to how lonely loss can be and how lonely grief can be. And I think that's something that I've noticed in my own life and experience with it, and then in clinical practice as well. That there's an isolating and lonely nature that can accompany loss and can accompany grief.
Yeah, absolutely. And in that, um, we're grieving, right? Grief
Mhm.
looks very different. Um, Yet, obviously, there are symptoms of grief.
Mhm.
There's different stages of grief as well. More people are becoming familiar with the stages of grief.
Mhm.
We've known them to have 5 stages, yet there's a 6th stage now as well. Don't ask me what that is, but I'm sure if I see it, I'll remember it. I don't know if you if you know, Deanna, but there is a 6 stage of grief.
No, I've heard that and stuff, but I do not know it off the top of my head.
It may be something to do with purpose. I think purpose.
Okay.
Yeah. Which makes sense to me, right?
Yeah.
So if we talk about grief, so we have the trauma, we have the loss, and then we have the grief, right? Grief is attached to both of these. In different ways, yet it's there. So we talk about the stages of grief. And during the holiday season, right? Why is it so important to talk about this? Because for many, many different reasons. Yet one of the most significant reasons is holidays are a time to spend with family and friends and loved ones. And sad to say, not everybody can say they have that for various different reasons. And this holiday may be someone's first holiday not having a special person around too. So holidays can embark a lot of different emotions for people, especially loved ones that have passed away and transitioned into the afterlife. And then there's the pieces of the family dynamics. You know, us as relational trauma experts, human emotion experts, we cannot not talk about dealing with the relational trauma and how those family dynamics impact the holiday season. So there's those that are dealing with losses of people that aren't here. And then there's those that are dealing with losses for people that are here, but the relationships are traumatizing. Why? Because like you said, there's no safety in those relationships. There's no security. There's a lack of compassion and empathy. But there is a lot of anger and rage. So what do we do with all of that when you are here and it is difficult for you to show up in those gatherings when you know if you go to a holiday dinner, this is what's going to happen, or you don't want to go? What about that? What are we going to do when you don't want to go? Deanna, what would you tell someone?
I would start by like normalizing any of it. Not, you know, I've never heard anyone share their story with me where I was like, oh, that doesn't make any sense. It always makes sense to me. However someone feels, however they're experiencing whatever's going on, it always makes sense. And so I think that like there's this idea that we have around the holidays, especially where it's this joyful, happy time of year, and we should all just be happy and like get your Christmas cheer on and all that fun stuff. And it drives me crazy because it's actually a very painful time of year for folks. And this idea that it should be this happy, the most wonderful time of the year kind of veneer on things makes it harder for those who don't feel happy or who are experiencing some sort of loss associated with the holidays or whatever it is, to have space to express that and share that. And there's I'll make a plug for another podcast episode. There's a podcast called Terrible Thanks for Asking by a woman from the Twin Cities who had a podcast really dedicated to grief and loss. And there's a great episode called Happy-ish Holidays where this woman shares about some significant losses that she experienced around the holidays and how for her they're not a happy time. They're not a joyful time. They're a very difficult time. And so she's not someone that I treat in my practice. She's not someone I know. But when someone comes to me with something like that, all I think is like, that makes so much sense to me. Of course, this is a painful time for you. Of course, this is not fun for you and you don't look forward to it. Of course. It seems so normal to me that based on your lived experience that would be the case. And so that's often where I start with clinically is like, how do we just like normalize something? Normalize that sometimes things feel bad because they're crappy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even in addition to just normalizing it, I genuinely, and you can disagree if you want, I genuinely believe that the holiday season is a very high stressful time for
Oh,
people,
yeah.
period. Even if they have all their ducks lined up in a row with their family.
Yeah.
Because
Uh-huh.
if it's not the family dynamics, it could be financial issues,
Absolutely.
right? It could be trying to
Mhm.
figure out who should I get what for. I don't want that person to be mad because I got this person this things. Like the whole concept of how we celebrate holidays is a whole different podcast in itself, right?
Oh
The
gosh, yeah.
commercialization and the capitalization of the holiday
Mhm.
season, that
Mhm.
it has been happening
Mhm.
for so long. And what it
Mhm.
also does is, Deanna, I believe it just brushes things underneath the rug because you're forced to show up for relationships that have hurt you. Well, Merry
Mhm.
Christmas to you. Eid Mubarak. I'm going to try to put everything behind and act like we get along
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
it's the holiday season.
Yes.
I'm a little extra today, guys. I'm sorry, but like you get the gist of what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Mhm.
if you don't, you're the scapegoat or you're trying to ruin the holidays. This is a time to be happy and jolly.
Mhm. Yeah.
So for me, these these events or situations are very superficial and take away from the real conversations we should be having.
Mhm.
If we are to celebrate each other and to celebrate as a family during the holidays, then why are we not protecting each other during the year? Why are we not showing up for each other during the year?
Mhm.
Why are we using unkind, hurtful language during the year? And I think more of us need to stand firm on this is not okay. But
Mhm.
again, I choose us and I choose me is a whole different, series we
Mhm.
can talk about, right? How to navigate those relational traumas.
Yeah.
But getting back to the holiday season, yes, I think it's very important that people know that we are suffering. Each and every
Mhm.
one of us has a trauma loss story.
Yes. Yes.
So, in that, let's just talk a little bit about the 5 stages. I think it's really important to kind of just
Mhm.
highlight those. So, the first stage of grief is denial, shock, right?
Mhm.
Self explanatory. The second is, I believe, is it depression?
I have to confirm. I have to confirm what
No,
order they
anger.
come.
I'm sorry.
Is
The
it
second
anger?
is anger.
It's anger,
The second,
bargaining, depression, acceptance. Yeah.
yeah. I think it's anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. Okay. And you guys, the reason why we're kind of having this difference is because I believe over time the 5 stages of grief have evolved. So they don't necessarily follow the same format like they used to when they were first studied.
Mhm.
Right? When they first originally were studied, they went by stages. But now, as we talk about grief and loss, at least in my clinical work, we see that people move from one stage to another.
Mhm.
You
Yes.
may not be at the denial shock stage. You may go straight to depression, or you may go straight to anger, right? Sometimes it looks like you're in the acceptance stage and you're really not, and you go back to denial. So, being mindful that as you're working through grief, these stages have some value to them, and give yourself grace when you find yourself to be really depressed or really angry, and then you feel like you've accepted the loss, because that's what the grief process is all about. So, Deanna, how was it like for you having to see your parents grieve the loss of a child while trying to take care of another child?
I think it's been quite a process over the course of my life. I think I understand it and think about it differently now as an adult than I did as a child, most certainly. You know, I will tell people I was raised by two grieving parents, and I really don't know what things would have been like for me otherwise, because Andrew was 3.5 when he died. I was 3.5 when Andrew died. He was 9. I was 1.5 years when Andrew was diagnosed with cancer. And so I don't know my life and my existence without some sort of, you know, turmoil going on. Is it related to his illness and his death? I think that I'm always very interested to hear what my parents have to say about it. And they don't say a ton about the experience, believe it or not. I'm 39 now, and I actually don't know a ton about the illness, the evolution of it all. My parents don't share a lot, even though they will mention Andrew. They don't share a lot. One of the things, though, that my dad said, and he said this to me about 1.5 years ago. About 1.5 years ago, I have a former colleague whose 11-year-old son died of cancer. And I had been home visiting my mom and dad in Missouri when I learned about this, and I was leaving to come back to go to the funeral. And one of the things that my dad said he thought was very hard for him and my mom, and their marriage survived the loss. A lot of couples who lose children, their marriages don't survive. He said one of the things he thought was so tricky is that when you move through the stages of grief with your spouse, you don't do it at the same time and the same stage as your spouse. And so you wind up kind of triggering one another. And I thought that was a really interesting and very kind of profound thing to say. And I think there's, you know, I think sometimes we think like stages of grief, you go through the stages neatly and pretty, and then you get to the final stage and you graduate and you're no longer sad. And that's not it. You kind of roll through them. And so that was one thing that my dad said. And another thing actually that he said once that I thought was really helpful to think about, and I see this a lot, is that he felt guilty when he started to experience feelings of happiness again, and in the midst of being this man who lost his son. And I think in particular for my parents, it was hard for them to, like, I'm thinking about like the first holiday season after Andrew died. He died in September. So the holidays came up like really very quickly, and I don't know this, but I imagine it was very difficult for them to navigate that first holiday season without Andrew, all while managing my excitement, because I would have been excited for things, and allowing me space to be happy to be with my cousins and to open presents and enjoy those things. And I think that would have been very tricky and difficult to navigate. And it's actually in recent years that it came up with my mom. We used to have this argument every year at Thanksgiving about putting up the Christmas tree. And I had advocated with my mom, we do a Christmas tree with no ornaments. We have a whole bunch of other things that go in it that make it really beautiful. So it's not like this just plain tree. It's a very beautiful tree. And I had advocated for that for a long time. And after we started doing that, my mom said that putting up the Christmas tree was really hard for her. It was very triggering because of all the ornaments that were my brother's, that were representative of his childhood and him not being here. And I found that, again, like it's always, when my parents tell me these things, it's always just very thought provoking for me, because they don't share a lot. And that makes sense to me, that like wrapped up in Christmas tree and baby's first ornament and different things that happen in your family that celebrates Christmas, like how painful those things can be. And in hindsight, I think having an ornamentless tree was actually very relieving for my mom in ways that she didn't expect, because she wasn't opening and putting up those ornaments every year. And so I don't know that I really answered your question, to be honest with you. My mind just kind of went in those directions.
You did an awesome job trying and explaining like the process that was actually happening in your family. But as a child, you didn't connect the dots. But then as you got a little bit older and now as an adult, you're understanding, okay, wait, this is what may have been happening at that time, right?
Yeah.
And I guess my question that I had is, did the ritual of not putting ornaments on the tree start after your brother passed away?
No. That was just in recent years that I was,
Okay.
because we were kind of like, my mom was like, I don't want to put up a Christmas tree. And I'm one, I told you at the outset, I'm one for tradition. I'm like, I want a Christmas tree. I don't put a Christmas tree up at my house, by the way.
But you want one.
But I want my mom and dad to have one because my mom and dad live in the same home that they built before I was born. Okay. So I like it to be the way I remember it. I like things to be the same. And it's actually just in recent years that we haven't had ornaments on the tree. We've had just a lot of other like decorative filler things and lights, and it's really very beautiful. But yeah, and that's where my mom then said that the ornaments were really hard for her. And I did not know that up to that point. I didn't know how hard the ornaments were for her.
So she was pushing through and putting them on for years.
Yep. And I don't even know that she realized how hard that was until we didn't put ornaments on. Right. And it was such a relief.
And you know what? She may have not even realized that that could have been an option.
Yeah.
Which comes back to one of the points, right? Like the world gives us these definitions of how we should be moving. What do celebrations look like? How do you have to show up? How do you have to dress up? How do you have to talk? Where do you have to go? Why do you have to do this, right? The world socializes us, and we get so caught up in it that we don't challenge it. And we're like, wait, it's hard. No, I don't have to do this. It takes away from our autonomy. It takes away from our authenticity and being in the space that we're in when we follow these social norms, social pressures, which is why the holiday season is so stressful.
It is. And in the States, it's particularly difficult because you have Thanksgiving and Christmas, and they're so close together that it's just so concentrated. Yeah.
And I loved you sharing your story. It also brought up another piece that I think is important to highlight here. You know, when you talk about the grief of your parents and not really knowing what was going on, they didn't talk about it. They give you bits and pieces now. Again, that's also part of socialization. I know in my clinical experience, it is hard for the elder generation to be vulnerable and to express emotions, especially around loss. And we're not even talking about gender right now, okay? Because we already know with men, it's harder. With women, we're more emotional, right? But in older generations, like the grandparents, great-grandparents, they were taught to pull it up and keep going. You don't die with the person. It's not the end of the world. So they didn't even allow themselves to grieve. And one may ask, Dr. Q, what is allowing yourself to grieve? Doesn't it just happen? You're right. But there is healthy grieving and unhealthy grieving. You want to tackle that really quickly? We're at 4.
I mean, one of the first thing that my mind associated to when I thought about like allowing yourself to grieve is like, I think that there's been just at large when it comes to bad feelings, and by bad feelings, I mean the ones that are painful and difficult to tolerate. There's a way in which we try to pretend that things don't hurt us. And I think grief is an area where that exists, and we minimize and try to pretend that something isn't painful or isn't hard or that we're fine. And you hear this in a lot of ways. I think that, you know, if someone's old, then it's like, well, they're old and they lived a really long life. And that's true. It could be true. It could be true that they lived a long, happy life and died peacefully in their sleep, like the best possible scenario. But also it doesn't mean that you don't experience a loss and that you aren't sad and that you aren't still grieving. And allowing that to exist. And I think it's hard for us to just say something hurts or that we miss someone, or that we're sad that someone or something in our lives is gone.
Yeah. I would also add, it's not just hard. we don't give ourselves permission
Mm-hmm.
to express ourselves,
Mhm.
right? Because we don't want to be, let's just say, the party pooper, right?
Mhm.
Like let's say you do go to a holiday party or a holiday dinner and someone asks you, "Hey, how are you doing?" Most people say, "Yeah, I'm hanging in there, it's fine." When they really want to say, "This sucks." I was in bed. I hated the fact that I had to get up, put my face on, pick a dress to be here when I really don't want to be here. Can you imagine if you gave that response to somebody at a holiday party gathering?
I can say two things to that. One is that actually I've got friends and relationships in my life where I could say that very
Awesome.
safely. And so I'm grateful for that. And that's actually the key to it is like if we're gonna be that honest, we have to have people in our lives that can tolerate the honesty and that can just make space for the honesty and allow it to exist. And just say, yeah, sometimes it's like that. And to that, if someone said that to me, I'd probably say like, I get that, and probably just I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, and
Mhm.
we can kind of shift into strategies, right? How do we
Mhm.
deal with it? We've identified the issue, right?
Mhm.
Of the human condition. Trauma,
Mhm.
grief, and loss are all part of life. We can't
Mhm.
run away from it. We
Mhm.
actually can't hide from it either, okay?
No.
You can try to duck it here and there sometimes, depending on what it is,
Yeah.
right? But no, it's inevitable. So we've identified an area of need, suffering, let's just say. So I want to spend some time talking about strategies, right? What can we do? And in that, I think, Deanna, you mentioned a very powerful, significant point here, which is community. Surrounding yourself with people who understand you, love you, and meet you where you are in your life. So when I give this example, great, you have honesty, right? So as a friend, I'm thinking it would never come to that because you would have known that friend couldn't show up
Mhm.
because of the honesty, and you probably would have made him or her a plate and dropped it off the next day or beforehand.
Mhm.
Or you may have coordinated something where you went over and just spent time with them. And if they did happen to show up, you know what I would have done? Similar to you, I'll be like, "All right, honey, let's go. Let's get you in the car. Let me get you an Uber and get you home. And I'll be right there after the party's over." That's what I would have done,
Mhm.
you know? But
Yeah.
again, there's that flip side to it too, right? Like you can get stuck in your grief.
Mhm.
So pushing yourself and showing up and not isolating yourself is actually
Mhm.
healthy, but you do have to know your limits.
Mhm. Yeah.
You
I
have to
th-
honor where you are.
yeah, I mean cuz grief is inconvenient. It's never there's never a good time to be bombarded with the grief that you feel and it just hits like grief to me is a lot like a tidal wave like you can only try to close that off for so long it doesn't work it can be really inconvenient and I think yeah having community having someone where you can share that with who can not even to say or do anything but just sometimes it's just nice to be able to have someone else just know how you're doing and knowing your limits is a big part of that sometimes we can't make something work and other times in understanding our limits it's like sometimes I gotta push myself to show up to something and attend because in the long run I know it's worth it for me to put that extra effort in and go and there isn't unfortunately a really perfect guidebook for understanding these parts of yourself but it takes a lot of introspection and just being really willing to reflect and understand what you need and lean into your needs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and sadly, I I think there's a lot of self-awareness that needs to happen with ourselves as humans, right? I wish we got a master class on self-awareness every
Oh
year,
man,
every stage of our life. And
seriously.
self-awareness is the key
Mm-hmm.
for us to understand what we need, what
Mm-hmm.
we can deal with, what we
Yeah.
can't, what is our capacity to show up right now.
Mm-hmm.
Self-awareness is also giving yourself permission to say no
Yes.
and
And
know that you are still going to be loved.
yes, absolutely. And like, even I haven't been able to keep up with all the comments today, but actually someone just commented, Sarah commented, sadness is a weakness in many cultures. And absolutely it is. I think painful feelings are a weakness and viewed as a weakness in many cultures. So we try to pretend like they aren't, like we don't feel that way, but we can't pretend our way out of our own experience and our own reality. Sadness, things feel sad because they're sad. In the same way that things feel happy because they're happy, they feel exciting because they're exciting, they feel scary because they're scary. Like it makes so much sense that we feel the way that we do. Again, in all my years in clinical practice, I've never had anybody tell me they feel something that's never made sense to me. And if someone tries to tell me they're happy when I can tell they're sad, I'll be like, really? I don't believe you. Like,
You look like you're pretend happy.
Right, exactly. And the pretend happy is it happens a lot. And I think that sometimes people think that if we acknowledge that we feel sad, that we're wallowing. And actually sometimes it's acknowledging how we feel and just the reality of it that allows us to work through the emotion that much faster.
Yeah. And oh God, naming it is so powerful.
God, yes.
Naming your grief and your emotions is so powerful.
Yeah.
And in that, do you know what I've been doing pretty consistently?
No, but I want to hear.
Well, as part of my own growth, right? From grief to growth. When someone asks me, how's my day going or how are you feeling? I am very transparent. I don't do the
I love it.
superficial, oh, I'm good. I can complain, but not really. I'm like, I'm hurting. My body hurts right now. It's heavy for me. It's the anniversary of my mom's death. Something like I'm very authentically present in my personal life, but also my professional life. Every day I'm authentic. One of the first things I do when I come into the clinic and my interns are here, I give them an emotional check-in and mental check-in. Listen, if you see me acting funny, it's because of this. Why? Because we have to practice it.
Yes.
So one of the ways you move from your grief to growth is honoring it first and foremost, naming it, acknowledging it, and staying in that place. There are times where I drive home at night and I just start crying out of nowhere. But I know that's nowhere. That is my grief for my parents, the losses that have come with it. So allow yourself to experience all the beautiful emotions. And like you said, Deanna, earlier, grief is like a tidal wave. It does get easier, right? Over time. Yet, one thing I would say is I don't, at this point in my life, experiencing grief the way that I've experienced it, I'm not sure if I believe there is an acceptance stage. I don't know how I will ever accept. I don't know what full acceptance looks like. Maybe 85, 90, even 99. I don't believe in my heart right now. There is an acceptance stage to grief. I think you can accept to live with it. You can move forward, but to fully accept it, I don't think it exists.
I think that's totally fair. That makes so much sense to me. Someone wrote in the comments also earlier is like maybe they were saying this the last stage or the sixth stage or whatever stage it was is like is
but Donald, let me pull it up. I wanted to share that. The last stage,
the meaning piece. And I think there's something so profound to that. And I think that that's very true, actually. Like in my own experience of having lost my brother and being raised by two grieving parents, I have no idea how my life would have shaped up otherwise, but I don't know that I would have become a therapist. And I don't know that I could sit with painful emotions that others are experiencing as easily as I can and as readily as I can without without that. And there is meaning in that. There is something, I think, very profound to that. And I think it shaped me in ways that I may never fully understand. But yeah, there is absolutely meaning in that. And I think finding meaning in grief is also a way of honoring the grief that we experience as well.
Yeah. You nailed it. Finding meaning. And that sounds about right. Thank you, Donald, for sharing that.
Yeah, I'm glad
The
you brought
last
that.
stage that
Mhm.
the last, again, I'm doing a lot of quotes today.
Mhm.
One of the stages of grief that was added was finding meaning, finding purpose.
Mhm.
And in that, talked a little bit about your life, right? And how would it be? Grief, loss does impact our life,
Mhm.
right? You just have to figure out whether it's going to be transformative or not.
Mhm.
Right. And when we talked about grief as healing, grieving constructively or destructively, that's the difference between taking your pain, right? Taking your trauma and changing your trauma to triumphs,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
And for me, as we kind of sort of wrap up, for me, what it really looked like is I focused on building Umeed Center as part of my parents' legacy.
Mhm.
And I lie to you not, until I started experiencing this grief, it never crossed my mind that I would have my own business. I always just wanted to work at a fancy big hospital.
Hmm.
It wasn't until I started experiencing the grief, losing my parents, and the things that happened afterwards that were even more painful,
Mhm.
that got to where I am today.
Hmm.
That my purpose, I'm living in my purpose. Is it hard? Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we didn't touch base on that I would love to talk about maybe at a future podcast, right? When you lose a loved one, especially, there's more losses that come with that loved one.
Mhm.
But we don't see that because we're just talking about that one person that's gone. We don't see the trickle down effect of the loss. And for me, I had a lot of trickle down effects, sadly. And I know I'm not the only one out there. The community that my parents were part of, the people that I grew up with who were my parents' friends that I don't hear from anymore. People not showing up for their 1 year prayer dinner that were 30 years friendships. Not getting invited to things that we were always invited to. Think about that loss that happened, the physical, and then the loss that came with the community that my parents were attached to. And I know I'm not the only one experiencing that. So in that, guys, I can go, I can go on and on about my grief transformation story, but I do want to leave you guys with a wonderful image of my parents. I brought it and I wanted to show it to all of you guys. So this is a picture of
I
my
love
mom
it.
and dad.
Mhm. I
And this
love
was
it.
actually through AI. My cousins were able to put my mom and dad and me in the same photo. So I carry this around in my office. It's right here. And if you guys are familiar with the Pakistani culture at all, my dad is blessing me with his hand on his forehead. So the significance of this photo, I don't know how to put it in words, but having them in my space is what helps me continue to grow with my grief. So here it is, guys. You've heard my grief story. I don't know, Deanna, do you want to say anything?
I think that's beautiful. And I'm so glad that you shared that. So
Well,
thanks everyone for being here. Such an important topic.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, Deanna, it is always a pleasure to
Yeah,
have
so
you
fun.
here. Let's figure out what we're doing next year.
Yes.
Christy, Sarah, Nicole, Jay, Donald, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. We'll see you guys next week. Take care. Bye-bye. Next month.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.